Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about talking about being black and white in America. And I have to tell you that this video has been really hard for me to put together and it's terrifying to do. And not because I'm afraid of offending black people, but I'm afraid of offending white people. Not because I think that white people have anything to be offended by, but I find that when we have these conversations, white people tend to get really defensive. I think the word racism is really charged. I looked it up and with racism meaning mistreatment or unfair treatment of someone because of the color of their skin. And I think most of the time with what happens now, white people don't even understand that they're treating someone differently because of the color of their skin. I read a book called Caste by Isabella Wilkerson, and it put it into such good perspective for me, because I don't think that racism is always what we are doing or intending. I think that we are in a caste system, and a caste system is a class structure that's determined by birth. Loosely, it means that some societies, the opportunities you have access to depend on the family that you happen to be born into. This phrase caste system has been around since the 1840s, but we've been using it since the 1500s. So usually when you think of a caste system, you think of India because they have 5 different caste systems. Her book, though, does explore the different caste systems around the world and how they damage the lives of not only the people on the one end of the caste system, but also the upper end, the lower and the upper end, how people's lives are really affected by it. So it's really a good book, and it kind of goes through that, in America over the last 400 years or so, that white people are at the top of the caste system in America, and people of color are at the lower end. Depending on the color you are, is the gradation of where you end up. So it's a really good book, and it really helped me reframe any feelings that I had about any kind of programming I had in my brain as a child or whatever of black people in America, because I don't consider myself a racist, but there were things that would come up that I would be like, oh, I didn't even realize that that was a difference there. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I think that, one, to have this conversation, if we talk about it in terms of how do we talk to our children about this? How do we talk to young people about this? And that's really scary, But I think that, as Brene Brown said, when children grow up in silence, they make up their own realities. So as parents and as adults and mentors, we have a responsibility to have the conversation. People want to talk about it or don't want to talk about it, and that's another story. But what do you say? What do you do? I do find that when these conversations come up, white people are extremely defensive about it oftentimes. And one of the things I've said before is, you don't have to defend yourself. Don't you just really want to know how other people feel? I mean, don't you want to know how people who are different feel about what's going on around them? And wouldn't, if you knew you were doing something that made somebody feel bad or uncomfortable or roll their eyes inside their head, that you would want to know that? I do. When I was getting ready to make this video, I actually called my one and only black friend in St. Pete, and I was tongue-tied and dry-mouthed, and I said, I have a question for you. And I told her that I was doing the video, and I said, most white people don't have black friends, and if they do, can they really talk to them about it? And she said, well, you can always talk to me about it. She was so much more comfortable talking about it because she talks about it every day in her own life. But for me, I was just so afraid. I wanted to get it right so badly. And so I asked her some questions, and she was just great. She was like, anytime you have any questions, just let me know. So it was really difficult. And I'm someone who really wants to talk about it, so I can understand how hard it is. Let me give you an example. I was trying to think of an example of like not talking about it and something that's not true. So when we talk about, so the first step, I did some research on this, and the first step was for people to acknowledge their white privilege. Now, again, people get jacked up about that, but is there or is there not a benefit to being white in America as opposed to being black, just by the color of your skin? So I wanted to think of an example of that, something like you don't have to defend it. It just is what it is. So growing up, I was the fun friend. My best friend Adrienne was the pretty one, and all the boys just loved her. And anytime we'd go anywhere, they thought I was a riot. They loved me, they loved having me around, but even the guys I was dating couldn't take their eyes off of her, which is probably not a good guy to date. But so it came to a time where one of the guys that I really liked, and he even knew I liked him, liked her. And she was not going out with him because she didn't want to hurt my feelings. So, of course, he brought it up to her. They talked about it. Everybody talked about it in their own camps. It was obvious of what was going on. But since Adrienne and I didn't talk about it, it was the gap between. So she and I did talk about it. And I said, oh my hell, well, you've got to go out with him. He ain't going to go out with me because they don't like me. And she goes, yeah, but I don't want it to be weird or uncomfortable. And I didn't want you to feel bad. So it all worked out really well. But we had the conversation. She didn't defend the fact that oh, well, no, the boys don't really like me as more. And it was just the truth. So you have a conversation about it. You try and bridge that gap. You consider what each other feels, and then you try and move forward. So that was an example that I came up with that I was trying to think of, that idea of acknowledging white privilege. It's just like, it is what it is. So when we hear something that makes us uncomfortable, we want to defend it, like the idea of white privilege. And if we would just listen and be willing to learn something. If you find yourself when people start having these conversations kind of judging, or, well, that's silly, or, well, what do you want me to do? Or, if you find your body you pay attention to your feelings inside or what your mind's doing, then you're being defensive and you're not listening. And I feel like mostly people need to be seen and heard, and then that's where the healing begins. You don't have to do anything yet. Can we just acknowledge what it is and talk about it? Keep in mind when you're talking to your kids, let's say you're talking to your kids about it, that you have an option to talk to your kids about this or not. Black people don't have the option to talk to their children about that. For them, this is a conversation they have to have for safety's sake and for navigating themselves in the world. So remember that when you're like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do this. It's really uncomfortable. But help your kids work to understand that they do have privilege in different situations and they don't have to feel bad about it. It's just, how do other people feel? It's like the kid that gets picked on. You'll want to have a conversation with your kid about that too. So number one, also educate yourself first. There's a tremendous amount of stuff on YouTube, and there's all kinds of stuff to educate yourself about how to talk to kids or just to talk in general. Or if you have a Black friend, talk to her or him. It's really very freeing when you do have the conversations and you're not defensive, because you realize you're just really learning about people in general. And you're not going to get it right necessarily. You can educate yourself, but you're not going to get it all right. It's going to be a continual learning process. But know that if the one thing that you want to do is to teach your children to treat all people with love and fairness, that's enough to start the conversation. So here's some things about in communicating with your kids. Don't avoid any of the questions. If you don't have the answer, just say, I don't really have that answer. Let me get back to you on that. Or let me think about that. Make the conversation age appropriate. So there are certain things that you might not talk about to a 6-year-old that you might communicate with a 16-year-old about. Those might be different conversations. Continue the conversation. So when you teach your children about how to spot racism or people being treated unfairly, help them spot those injustices, even the small ones, and have conversations about how to do that differently. It's also important to talk to them about our differences in a positive way. I mean, being different is a good thing. It's okay that we're different. That's what makes the world go round. That's what makes it beautiful. It's okay to acknowledge that. We just want to acknowledge how we treat each other, whether we realize it or not. And if your child makes a judgment, if you see them making a judgment about something, whether it's black, white, the bully, the quiet kid, or whatever, have a conversation with them about it. Help them deconstruct what they're thinking and what's going on in there. And again, there's a lot of resources for you to do that. If you don't know how to do it, even just having the conversation of, why do you think you look at that person differently? Or what do you think they feel like, is really the impetus of the conversation. There is a lot of resources you can use for the children. So there's lots of documentaries and videos and books and YouTubes and all those kind of things. Take them to museums. I mean, there's so many things. The Holocaust Museum, that's a heavy one, but you can go through different parts of it. There's so much there. And they have programs to reach out to different age groups. They really address this in a lot of different ways so that we can, as a world, learn how to see each other. Acknowledge their feelings too. So, a child might feel then bad about their Black friend not being treated fairly or the racial injustices. So you might want to talk to them about how they can become their friend's ally in this situation and what would be the best way to be their ally, or to maybe even let them be heard, or let them know that they care, that they care, and how can they be their ally in it. This is the hardest one. Lead by example. Now that terrifies me because I want to get it right so bad. I want everyone to feel seen and heard and loved. And it's just not going to happen just because I decide that. I'm learning still about things that I didn't even realize make people feel marginalized, or make them roll their eyes inside their head because of the paradigm that I thought this information was based on is hurtful for them or damaging for them based on the history. Watch your kids' media sources and watch your own, that your kids can hear you. So they're watching you. So if you are watching or listening to things that are coming from anger, or that you can feel when you're watching it that you're getting argumentative and you're getting jacked up about it, pay attention to that because they're watching and they're learning from you. Again, I think you'll find it freeing to learn about what other people feel like. It helps bridge that gap between connectiveness. And there's something about being humble and a little vulnerable in the fact that you don't know, that brings you together with that person, even if it's just for the fact that you care enough to ask the questions or have the conversation. So remember, you're not going to get it perfect. But as Dr. Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. And I think we can all do a little bit better. Love you guys. Bye.